All right, good morning, everybody. I would like to call the Economic Development Commission meeting to order. Today is Thursday, April the 9th, 2015. We have to approve the minutes of both last March's meeting as well as the special meeting that was held
Last February.
last February, correct. So, do we have any comments on either set of minutes? Changes, edits? Do we have a motion for approval of the minutes of the special meeting and March?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We have a request that item number 6, report from Nancy Hasse, be moved up after the planning director. Is there anybody that has a problem with moving that up? Okay. Pardon? Do you want to address that
Too
too?
many players here.
Or did you want to address?
No, I would have her address it because of
Okay.
the status of, I haven't been part of staff meetings, so.
Okay. With that, we'll turn it over to Planning Director Hiram Peck for an update.
A couple of things that are going on. One is that on Monday night, the zoning commission approved the development, the PAD development for the residential portion of the development at 34 Hop Meadow, the Northeast Utilities property. And there were a number of conditions and modifications. The commission, they have been actually in the application process since late last fall. Commission approved that with a number of modifications. Decision letter on that will probably go out today or tomorrow, as soon as I get it out.
Well, what does that mean, Hiram?
That there are 3 portions of that particular PAD development.
Mm-hmm.
When that was originally approved, Dave, the Northeast Utilities building was scheduled to stay exactly where it is, as was Northeast Utilities itself.
Right,
Since then, of course, Northeast Utilities has announced that they're moving from that site.
right.
There's no plan right now to change that building. In other words, the way it is the way it was approved, is that building would remain in place. So if someone else comes in to sort of, locate in that particular building, they can do that. If there's any proposal to change that building at all, it would have to come back through the commission process for reapproval. What did get approved at this point in time is the first phase of the development on the southern portion of the site. That is the portion that abuts the Avon town line. And that's a series of apartments that will ultimately, as soon as DOT gives their approval, begin construction.
So they can go ahead with the portion close to the Avon line, but the CL&P building status is,
It's going to stay where it is right now, as far as we know.
yeah,
The owner of that building was there on Monday night and said, as far as he was concerned, they had a lease through 2016, 2017, I'm not sure the exact date, and they would be required to honor that lease, whether it was pay him that rent or pay him that lease or whatever, or buy their way out of it, whatever there were. But CL&P has indicated that they plan to move from that site.
so it could be commercial or it could be residential or,
It could not be residential. It would have to go back through the process. I would doubt very seriously that the zoning commission would hear a proposal to make that residential as well.
so,
Residential component is what was approved.
right,
The portions along Hop Meadow Street with a 100-foot conservation easement along the front would be commercial, small-scale commercial.
and the CL&P building as of now, its status is only commercial, could go in there if they flipped it?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. Just to let you know, too, we're also working hard on the Hartford property as well. I've talked to 3 or 4 different interested parties. As soon as I give them information about the process and the current zoning for that property and what could be done there, turn them back to the Hartford and to the Realtor, and we're waiting to hear back from hopefully one of them in the hopefully near future. As you know, the Hartford will be in the property until at least the end of this year, even into the beginning of next year. So we have a little bit of time, but there are several people that are interested in that property. I talked to a number of significantly sized development firms in the last couple of months, and a number of them are very interested in the process and what we went through and what the plan came out with for that particular property. So we're hopeful that something will happen there in the near future, although that's entirely up to the Hartford and CBRE, their Realtor. So those are the main things. Just to let you know, too, we are in the process now of starting the process to redo the survey that we did in 2008 with regard to town development. There was lots of discussion about this on both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance with regard to what do people feel about the whole community center, senior center idea that's come forward. And so one of the things that we thought, at least I've been talking to Lisa for about 3 years now about trying to get the survey that we did in 2008 redone and sort of updated to bring people's attitudes and opinions back into focus about this issue. Another issue that we have is open space. It may not be, primarily on this particular board's mind, but a number of other boards are concerned that 32% of the town is classified as open space. That has significant impact for a lot of things. One is it's great for open space, it's great for a lot of the environmental things, but it has a significant impact with regard to what we have for the grand list. So what do we do with all this property? Over the years, a number of...
Sell it.
Well, that's one option. Okay. You beat me to it, but that's one option. A number of people, and obviously if you're a conservation person, you might not feel the same way, but if you're the Parks and Rec people that have to maintain all that property, you might feel exactly that way. So what we have done is started an analysis that'll probably take us this year to finish with regard to analyzing every single piece of open space as to what its benefit is to the town. Is it great for open space? Does it have a lot of environmental attributes? Or is it a little tiny piece of open space that was taken as part of a subdivision process that really doesn't have any open space function other than to put some trees between you and your neighbors? And is that really what the function of open space was? So we're doing that analysis now. We're going to talk about that in the survey that we're going to update as well. And should some of this be sold? Some of this is a lot easier to say than do, because when these particular pieces of open space were originally dedicated to open space, Planning Commission approved it as part of the subdivision process, perhaps years ago. Then it ultimately went to the Board of Selectmen for a receipt, and the Board of Selectmen then approved it. So to undo that whole process, in each and every situation, maybe a little bit differently. So we have to look carefully at it to find out whether we can do that or not.
I have a question on that. So, in instances of small pieces, like you said, that might have been part of a subdivision, would the homeowners that would be impacted by permitting additional development have super votes, so to speak, with respect to if the town sold that out for additional development? It would presumably be additional residential units, but if you're that was probably one of the selling features of the property that you purchased, is that you were purchasing with open space, and if the town then sells it off to a developer who's going to put houses there, that would probably also decrease the value of your house. So
a couple of things. One is, one of the reasons that we're doing the analysis of all the open space is to make those kinds of determinations, to find out what the value of each of those portions of open space are. The second thing is that if a parcel is, and this isn't set in stone yet because I'm not the person that makes the decision, but my suggestion is that if a parcel is decided to be expendable, that is taken out of the open space category, one of the first options would be to offer it to the people that live there next to it, that abut it, as parcel that they could purchase if they wanted to. They could put a conservation easement if they wanted to, but the fact is the town doesn't want to maintain these anymore. What happens in reality is, as you may know, is that some people that live next to these places think that they're a really great place for their own tomato gardens. They think that they're a great place to dispose of their Christmas trees or their holiday decorations, whatever the case may be. And so sometimes the open space is not really used as the way it was intended. But one of the things that, Jay, that would happen is that if they're determined to be sold, it would be offered to the people that live next to it in order to preserve that as open space for those people. So that's definitely on the radar, no question about that.
Who's doing the analysis? Is it town staff, or is it
Who's
doing the analysis? Is it just town staff, or is
It's
it?
actually, there's Open Space Committee, which is members, August, chairman of the Planning Commission is on that. The Zoning Commission has a representative. Open Space Commission has a representative. There's a member at large, I think it's Helen Peterson right now, and the first selectman is a chairman of that board. And what they've decided to do is have Parks and Rec sort of head it, along with the town engineer. Don Rieger from Conservation has started an analysis of it, and he's done a really good job of doing a preliminary analysis. And as part of that, Parks and Rec has obtained the services of a summer intern that will work all summer long on this who has experience with regard to open space type activities. So it'll be a combination of staff and intern to put that together. We hope that by the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, we should have this study should start to come into focus, and then it'll become available to the public for review and comment. But that's one of the other things we wanted to cover in the survey as well, to see how people feel about this, because they may have some of the exact same concerns that Jay had, and we're well aware of that.
So you said there's a survey component of that study too?
The survey will talk about land use in general. We'll talk about the community center, senior center, how people feel about that. May talk about where it goes, how much people are willing to pay for it, things like that. The survey is going to be designed by professional survey folks. The way we did it last time came out really, really well. The firm that's been retained to do that is called Great Blue Research, and they're located here in Connecticut. They've done this stuff many, many times for other communities all over the eastern seaboard, actually. So.
Me?
Up to
No,
you,
yes.
Casey.
Go ahead.
I had two questions. One, with regard to the open space, you talked about in those areas where it may be abutted by residential and may go to those people, which makes a lot of sense. Do you know if there are areas that may be able to come back onto the grand list as potentially developable property, commercial property, that had been there for a long period of time and looks to be something that might be beneficial to the town? I don't know if that exists, but
There's a possibility, for example, and this is definitely just an example, please, but there was, the flower farm that was discussed a while ago that was purchased specifically for open space. So the money that was used for that and the way that was presented to the public was specifically for open space. So as you can imagine, Lou, there's a bit of a process that we need to go through to untangle that. Perhaps if that were sold, that money would have to go back into an open space fund.
that was actually my second part of the question.
Yeah.
Has there been a discussion whether there's residentially sold to abutters or to developers, whatever the case may be, if the town sells and receives proceeds, as to how that money will be allocated or used? Has that been part of the
Short answer to
discussion?
your question is no, that discussion hasn't taken place yet, but clearly it's one of the things that will have to be discussed in detail before that decision's made. And sure, the Board of Selectmen, and I'm sure everybody will weigh in, this board can certainly weigh in as well. Conservation will be heavily engaged in that process as well. So, yeah, absolutely.
Because it's kind of counterintuitive if we're looking to relinquish open space and you receive funds and give it to the open space committee or a fund for open space, you're kind of in a vicious circle as opposed to segregating it for some other potential purpose in the town that people may want
That's right.
in a particular area that may help.
And one of the things we may end up, and I don't know for sure if this is the case, but one of the things that the survey may end up determining is that people in town feel, okay, 32% of the town preserved as open space is enough. We have enough, and we shouldn't buy any more. However, other people may feel there are really very environmentally sensitive places that really ought to be purchased by the town. And I don't know what's out there yet in terms of the survey. But when we did the survey last time, we were very careful to make sure that it was done in a way that was statistically defensible, that we contacted and talked to at least 400 people. There's an extensive interview that those folks go through. It's probably 15 or 20 minutes on the phone with them to get detailed. And it's a broad spectrum, done completely on an objective basis. So there's no, calling specific interest groups or having people reply to an internet survey that only certain people are going to reply to anyway. And I heard an interesting statistic this morning, is that 15% of the people in this country don't have access to the internet. I was shocked. We're really way down in the list of countries in the world of folks that don't have access to the internet. So when you do a survey like that, and it's internet-based, you're going to get a reduced response from certain people. So we have everybody's phone number, all their cell phone numbers, and they'll be selected at random to make the responses to those and get answers to those questions.
Does it change the requirements for future subdivisions for open space?
There have been a couple of changes in the last
But
few
they have
years
cell
under
phone
the
numbers.
August chairmanship of the Planning Commission. The subdivision regulations were revised about a year or two ago. And one of the things that can happen now is that people can offer a fee in lieu of open space, so that they can offer to pay for that. The state statutes have a process where they say that 10% of the value, pre-development value of the property can be used as that fee. So for example, if you have a $100,000 piece of property, just for example, the open space fee there could be no more than $10,000. That process is really complicated and really long because it involves one appraiser from the developer, one appraiser from the town. If they don't agree, then you have to get a third appraiser, you got to pay them all. By the time you finish with all that, the money's gone. And so what we did in the regulations, and this is legal, town attorneys confirmed that we say $2,500 a lot if you don't want to provide open space, and you propose that to the commission. Commission may or may not accept it. It may be a part of that particular property has a really good piece of land that might be good as open space, or it might not. Or if all it does is abut a bunch of other homes and everybody's fine with it the way it is, then it could be provided as fee in lieu of open space. So that's another mechanism there. One of the other things that the Planning Commission has done recently is say, we don't want to take the open space, we don't want to own it, but we want it preserved. So conservation easements have become more and more useful to the Planning Commission as well. And so that's another mechanism that they use. And then there's the conventional open space where we'll take this open space, you don't have to provide anything, you don't have to pay anything, and so on. So there's at least 3 different mechanisms there.
What about some of those, I assume one of the other options is, if a space gets identified and the town doesn't want to maintain it, and they want to sell it, I assume groups like the Land Trust and stuff could come in and I assume that groups like that could come in and buy it if they still wanted it to be like it was, right?
Yep, exactly. What happened, Chuck, is that, for example, on East Weetog recently, the Ellsworth property, the Land Trust just bought 75 acres that abuts the state property up there as well, which is a very, a beautiful piece of property. There was lots of discussion back and forth. The subdivision of that property had originally 3 lots down on East Weetog and then only 3 more up on top, up on Tucket Mountain. And so out of that whole 95 acres, I think there were a total of 5 houses that are going to ultimately get built, possibly. 75 acres went to the Land Trust, so you're exactly right. There are also a lot of other organizations, and they're not too often used here, but there's Audubon Society, there's a Nature Conservancy, there's a ton of other organizations that can take open space as well. One of the things that towns have to be really, really careful of is that when you start to get rid of open space, you need to be careful of creating the perception that if somebody wants to give the town some open space or deed the town some open space, that they don't think it's going to just be turned over to some developer to develop in the near future. To be really careful about public perception and how that process works. There need to be a very clear and transparent process about how this whole thing works. So, very careful on that.
Well, I think along those lines, as you look at this going forward, you'd want to make sure the open space that was granted, it's way distant from, let's say, the population centers that is seldom used, is far different from open space that is closer in that people can actually enjoy. And to hopefully separate those two and not put large pieces that people can enjoy and try to make those off bounds, and to make that differentiation as we go forward.
Yeah, there are a lot of distinctions that'll be made, Mark. People's opinions about these are going to vary depending upon where you live, probably, frankly. And if you live up near McLean, you're going to think that's great. It's a wonderful place. If you live near East Weetog, where that 75 acres is, you're going to probably think that's great. However, if you're interested in the town center, you're probably going to think the meadows and the plan for the meadows is going to be really important. So we got to take all that into account. No question about that. So.
Go back on the timetable on this survey, and the reason it's kind of interesting, and one of our select people is here. When they voted the senior center move forward, and I'm not exactly sure how the vote went, contingent on that was put forth that there was going to be a survey of what the population felt about a senior center. And now you're mixing a lot more into here. So I'm interested in the timing because this whole senior center thing, which is kind of oblique to the survey now, that was originally why the survey was going to be put into place, if what I heard was correct. So I'm interested in the timing because, to me, when you start diluting the intent of the survey, which I'm hearing is coming in here, the real issue is this back-end approach that we're having to the senior center. And all kinds of mush comes out of it until we have the people express how they really feel about this whole thing.
Yeah,
and we're talking an $800 or an $8 million project or something, which is in a state of back-end tool management, as far as I can see. So that's why I'm interested in the timing on the survey.
Couple things, Dave. One is the two issues that I mentioned that will be incorporated into the survey are the two that I mentioned, open space and the senior/community center. Those are the two main issues that we wanted to redo the survey for. There'll also be some other land use issues about how people feel about different types of development, like we did in 2008. If you haven't seen that, take a look at it. I think that survey is probably still on our website, so take a look at that. But the time frame, back to your original question, is about 7 weeks. So we're going to start it probably week after next, and it'll be done within 7 weeks. That's the time frame that the agreement is for. So it'll be very quick.
How much does that cost, the town?
About $13,000. Yep. There were two proposals, and we selected the lower bid, and we think that it's just as good as the higher bid, and that was about $23,000.
How do you have, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, how do you have their cell phone numbers? Like, I don't have a landline anymore, and I think a lot of people are going in that, and maybe older people do, and they're the ones picking up the phone in on the survey. So how is that addressed?
They do have, both the consultants that we talked to, Carolyn, said that they do have access to those. How they get that, I honestly don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I'd be glad to ask them that question, but maybe
Okay.
that's a trade secret. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't know
we're-
about that.
Yeah, we're
'cause
very
they're-
careful about that, actually, because we think that that's a very valid question, and lots of people more and more are abandoning their landlines, so, sure.
Okay.
Will residents be notified that the survey is coming? So
Absolutely. We'll notify the residents, we'll notify the
Okay,
police. Last time, we had a couple people call, say, hey, this crazy person's calling me, is this legit, or what? And they said, yeah, we want to make sure that they all know it. So as soon as it's ready to go out, we'll put it on the website, we'll put it in the newsletter online, so we'll make sure that all the organizations know about it. We'll probably talk about it briefly at another meeting coming up in near future, so we'll let people know.
I have a pretty specific question. I don't know if anyone knows the answer. Do we know how many unique users a month use the senior center?
I don't, but the survey was done when they did the initial plan. The numbers, in the meetings that have been held to discuss that, there were specific numbers about that. I don't remember the number right now, Jay, but I do know that information's available, and I'm happy to get it for you.
Yeah, that'd be great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure. Yeah. There's also one quick thing, and I'm done with, I don't want to take up too much more time. We wanted to make sure that the programming for the senior center is done correctly. That is, we know exactly how much space is needed for what activity and so on. So we're in the process now of carefully researching that. We also have a lot of work to do on the area where the senior center is proposed to go, and whether there's soils information, there's flood information, there's all kinds of other land use information that we're in the process of gathering and collecting right now. So that's underway as well at the same time, so.
Any other questions?
How about my favorite subject? What's the status of it?
Well, I mentioned the Hartford already, so you must be, let's see.
I'm the guy cutting the ribbon, remember?
I talked to the engineer for the Big Y last week, Dave, because I knew this meeting was coming up, and I knew somebody would ask.
Dave, I'm going to give you all my silver coins.
What I'm told is that right after the closing, they submitted their application to DOT for the traffic light. There'll be a traffic light at their entrance to their driveway, so they're waiting to just get through the DOT process to start their construction. That's the best I
Have they paid the money for the building permits yet?
No, as far as I know, they haven't. They've submitted their final plans, but they haven't come in to actually draw the permit yet. So I think they're just waiting for DOT to give that approval.
Hurry up, I'm getting old.
Kind of other things, but I'll save that for some other time.
Okay.
Thanks very
You
much.
have other choices.
Thank you.
What a joke
Thanks.
this is.
Nancy, you're on.
Good morning. So this morning, I think Hiram sent off to you guys yesterday, and I provided copies for you this morning. And I think this, again, it always seems to be what I talk about, transitions well to discussion of website. So what is in front of you this morning is a discussion that the task force had at its last meeting. Just to back up a little bit, of course, we had the discussion around the core statement as it related to the marketing study, and from there, we discussed refreshing the brand. And so there was consensus among the group, and we sort of that was the initiation of the discussion at our last meeting, was confirming, yes, we talked about refreshing the brand, are we still all thinking that we want to move forward with something like that? And so there was definite agreement among the group that that was the case. So with that, we had asked Main Street to look at all the other pieces that have been being used over the last 8 years to market the town. And Sarah can speak to some of the uses of those things, but it's really been, again, it was touted in the marketing study. They've been used by tourism and to market the Hartford. And then most recently, I know that Main Street was contacted by Landworks because they've been using the materials themselves to do that. So over the years, the First Selectman's office and Sarah's put together multiple packets around marketing the town for those pieces. So the end game, really, the way we were looking at it is refreshing the website, bringing the content sort of, with more of a focus to economic development, having these pieces redone, including the educational piece that was created but never produced, would give the town a nice package of materials that they could move forward with to market the town. So with that, the task force reviewed what's in front of you, which is revising the Simsbury brand. And for full transparency on this, of course, when Main Street did this 8 years ago, they used Dornenberg Advertising, and Jeff Dornenberg is part of the task force, and so he did recuse himself from the discussion. And Sarah went on to explain some of the details around the scope of work to do this. And so what we have here is, and we had some discussion around sort of the quantity of what was needed, some suggestions from the task force about reducing or increasing quantities of different things. But we seem to think this was a good start to those pieces. So it include the folder and the brochures that they've used, and again, the educational piece. But it also includes the design services to do all this work. And some of the comments from the task force with folks that were present, one being Charmaine Seavey, who's a media buyer, and actually Deb Bernard, who's done a lot of marketing herself, was this really is, and when Jeff and Dornenberg Advertising did this the first time, a very good deal for the town. And I think the way we likened it was, like the website, we went to Virtual Town Hall, which is our current resource. Instead of going out for an RFP and spending a lot more money to get a new website, we're going to be able to achieve that for less using a current vendor that we already have. And so I use that same analogy with Main Street. 8 years ago, they did this branding, and we can go back to them as a resource and contract with them. They will, and although this isn't part of their current work plans they proposed for this coming year, nor was the task force for that matter, but they will manage the project for the town. And in the end, basically what we have is, again, a complete package of materials. So what I wanted to ask of you folks today is, the task force met, but we did not have a quorum. However, we were shy just one member. All the folks there unanimously agreed that we should move forward with this, and subsequently both Sarah and I have had conversations with the First Selectman, and she is encouraging us to move forward. She did and ask us to be mindful of the fact that this goes through the same process as the website contract did, and that ultimately the decision is left to the town, and that those final decisions on what the materials will be would be left to the town. And the task force would, through Main Street, make recommendations through that marketing committee of the task force. So do you all have any questions? I know it was a spew.
Actually, we can be cautious too as well. Main Street is not initiating this. The task force is initiating this. I want to be very clear because I don't want people to think, well, oh, more money's coming to Main Street. This is something that was not asked of us. We had not planned it for this year. So I just want to be very clear that we are not initiating this. We probably would go after grant funds to refresh the brand in a couple of years based on money. There is money to do it with the task force, but you're going to get questions, well, Main Street's getting this money. No, you're subcontracting back out to Main Street because we, with huge townwide support, we had created the brand. While you guys are the keeper of the brand on the town side, we're the creator and keeper of the brand, just as in general. So I just want to make that clear.
So, looking this over, the main thing I see here is revise the existing tagline to fit with the new economic development efforts. Could you pinpoint what specifically would be different with the new branding as opposed to the old branding?
Well, here's the thing. I guess I can answer that.
Highlights.
Yes. I don't know what that would be yet, Mark, because what will happen is we'll go through.
Answer that question.
I don't know what that would be, what would look like yet, because we go through the same extensive process we went through last time. The EDC, residents, realtors, people that use the brands would go back, we go back through the brainstorming sessions with Dornenberg, Callenbeck advertising. So I don't know exactly what that would be. I think it's important to say that the brand would not change drastically, meaning that we have a lot of equity in the brand that we've already created. But we would update the brands. There's a lot of projects that have come online with regards to economic development. There's a lot of projects and things that have come online with regards to the Performing Arts Center and the Meadows. So, improvements in the Simsbury Farm. So we would go through that same exhausting process of all the stakeholders coming together. I don't know what it'll look like yet.
Okay.
Because I did ask Jeff that question as well.
I have a lot of thoughts going around in this empty head of mine, but the first one, when we first met with the EDC task force, the first couple of times we met around here, and a lot of that discussion, going back to the original meetings, was about what is our message. That's kind of how we started. So to Mark's question, we should have some idea of what our message is already, because we sat around that table with a host of all different walks of the community to discuss that. So everything the EDC task force is doing should be on that message already. And it gets, I just want to put that there, because my real question is, I understand the branding and maybe it's time to do something. However, I'm concerned that the branding that was done by Main Street last time was more in line with a quality of life situation and not an economic development situation. So with that in mind, I want to be very sure about who's managing this, because if we're going to do the branding and it ends up going down a path that's more quality of life, then it's not part of the EDC task force, and it should be something done completely differently.
Well, and I can tell you, to answer both of those concerns can be answered with one statement, I guess. That's what we've been doing all along. I mean, you're part of the task force, we had conversations around sitting down and saying what makes Simsbury Simsbury, but with an eye towards economic development. So the whole focus towards this, and where we got to this point, was heritage, charm, opportunity. And so we can't just fly with that. What we now want to do is take that, because it's got both a residential and a business use to it, and it is the quality of life that makes this an attractive place to do business in our town. So we're going to take all that, get it perfected and done, and so it's certainly not going to have the focus it did before, but to Sarah's point, it's got brand equity.
And I hope Chris can back me up. In small communities, community development is economic development in a community like Simsbury. That's number one. Number two is our biggest economic development driver tends to be the quality of life issues. I mean, that's the reason that even though our taxes are a little bit higher, even with the tax decrease of, for the last 2 years, that, Chris, I mean, that's why people are purchasing in Simsbury. Quality of life is a huge piece of economic development.
Well, I think it's backwards. I think quality of life is the default for this town because we don't have the drivers for the economic development, or we haven't pursued them over the years. We're relying on, what you're saying is, well, quality of life drives residential and there's our economic development. Not necessarily.
No, I'm not.
Really, we have to change the paradigm, and we have to start looking at what's going to drive economic development. We have the quality of life, and I don't think there's anybody that comes here that doesn't believe we have that. That's not the branding we need. That's not the marketing and the message we need. We need to say, why should a developer come here and invest his dollars in this town?
But would that be addressed in the opportunity component of the?
Well, it's the message. All I'm saying, I'm just going back to, but we talked about it.
You can't parse it apart, though, and I think that's Sarah's point. I mean, I don't disagree that when, Main Street started this, the focus was towards residential, and yet at the same time, they obviously, as Sarah stated, know that, having a quality of life feeds your economic development. It doesn't feed residential economic development, it feeds economic development in its totality. So,
well, I don't think that's true. I think there are plenty of towns that have economic development and the people live out of town. So the quality of life in that particular town does not drive the economic development.
But it drives why they choose to locate their business there.
No, it doesn't. No, the dynamics of the town, the taxes, the ease with which you get through development drives the economic portion, and people will, I'm going to build my business here, but I'm going to go live in Simsbury. And I can give you thousands of examples of that. What we're trying to do is to say, I live in Simsbury, and now I want to bring my business here. And that's a completely different message than the quality of life. I'm not saying we don't talk about the quality of life, but we can, and that's our A game. We have to change our C game and make it our A game.
But I think the branding that Main Street has, so right now what we have is 3 brochures that say Heritage, Charm, Adventure. Okay, and they talk about quality of life. I mean, if you're looking at developers like Landworks who uses these brochures, or real estate agents, or Simsbury Inn for visitors, tourism, whatever, it does speak about just the quality of life. But what was the conversations that have been had in the marketing subcommittee of the task force has been, because I've been public audience at almost all of them. I've been the only one there for public audience, has been around refocusing not only the photography, but the message to talk about development in this town. And opportunity is where that piece changes, because it's no longer 3 pieces about just how pretty it is to live in Simsbury. It's
Yeah, I see the point that's being made, and I guess this is my thought on it, is that to the extent we have a real outreach for economic development to bring business here, and I don't mean people who are already here, gee, I should build my business here, but bringing people from other parts of the country, from international components who want proximity to the 2 cities here. I think that's a huge source of growth and of opportunity for us, is to reach out beyond our current boundaries to bring business here. And we need to compete, right? We have to compete with lots of towns. You have to compete with Avon, Farmington, Glastonbury, Fairfield County. So there's lots of places that we have to compete with. So if we're in a regional marketplace and we have to compete with lots of different areas, how do we compete? So we have to go with what our strengths are, what our competitive points of differentiation are. And I think they are largely, our geology is really a big part of it. We have a bucolic setting. We also have fantastic schools, highly educated workforce, all those things that kind of come into a nice downtown. So it is kind of quality of life stuff, and I think that is important for, as a competitive differentiator. I mean, to your point, Lou, we do have to do the other things to make it easier for businesses to decide to locate here. We can't make it hard for them to get permits. We can't make it hard for them to figure out, gee, like the GIS was great. But I mean, I think you're right. We've got to do this. But I think those are kind of table stakes. Like, that's stuff we've got to do. And can we do a better job? Yeah, we probably could do a better job on those things. But I think the quality of life stuff is a point of competitive differentiation. We probably need to leverage it more and leverage it better and leverage it differently.
And that's the reason.
But the opportunity piece speaks to, we offer tax incentives, we've got,
I think we have to be careful, because the opportunity piece isn't a done deal, because again, what we're gonna do is project. But I will say, the other thing is, we didn't just do like a couple of nice brochures, okay? I wanna be very clear on that. If you look at the economic development folder that everybody uses, it talks about, it's a positioning statement, Lou. It talks about our proximity between, to Bradley Airport. It talks about equidistance between New York and Boston. It talks about the types of companies we have. I mean, and we're going to obviously refine that. There's a lot of new stuff, a lot of new projects, a lot of new excitement. So I agree with you, but I disagree in that. I think that we can better refine the economic development message you're looking at, but I don't want to lose quality of life. The marketing study, which is what Jay's talking about, the marketing study that was done, which kind of precipitated all, the fair weather marketing study, it talked about why high-tech manufacturing companies and all these other companies might be a niche for us. And the number one reason was they can choose to go anywhere. They can choose to be in Silicon Valley. They can choose to be anywhere in the United States. Why would they choose Simsbury? Well, our competitive advantage is we have a top-notch school system. We have, that has the STEM program. We have a highly educated, all of these things equate to why a company would choose from out of Simsbury to come into here, when they can choose anywhere, not just in the region, but in the country.
And there's a different mindset to the type of companies that we want to attract. We're not going to get Fortune 100 companies. We don't want to attract, and we can't really attract the companies where dollars and cents have to factor in, no question, have to factor in. But when you have your matrix of the things that are important to you, when we're bringing in businesses that have high-paying jobs, these are all people-intensive, intellectual capital-intensive. Those types of businesses are the businesses that we should be attracting because it brings high-paying jobs and it raises the boats, and it's also the ones that we're best positioned to attract.
Exactly what the market said.
Yeah, it's what we're best positioned to attract.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's very, very valid.
Well, to that point, if I could just say, the Hartford, we're discussing the Hartford because the Hartford chose to build a new building, not in Simsbury, in Windsor.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't on quality of life. Bottom line. End of subject, bottom line. I'm not saying you don't talk about quality of life, but if you're going to drive your brand and your message on quality of life, you're going to miss the opportunity. Jay, to your point, Simsbury has over the last few years done some amazing things that have really changed the game and given Hiram a lot of tools in the toolbox, as he calls it, and the business incentive policy and all these things coming out and our ease with which we can get through the system now have all really changed from years ago. I think it's phenomenal. We need to get that out. That's the message that needs to get out. But that's
I want to be able to bring the conversation full circle here
We
because
segue now into our website.
well, but here's where we are with this.
I'm still on
If
this.
I could ask, here's where we are with this. All of this is what needs to be discussed, as Sarah said, within this process. So what we would like to do, so we can move forward with this, is the task force meets again April 22nd. I know that because it's my anniversary. We will have to formally have them vote with a quorum to be able to do that. But what I would love to have this board do is support with the task force's approval, moving this forward to the Board of Selectmen, because we would like to take this work and in tandem with refreshing the website, keep moving forward to get this stuff done. And all of this will be part of that conversation.
I will just say, I 100% agree with you, Lou, on your last statements. I think that's also part of the reason why we refresh the brand. There are a ton of new things and new tools that have recently come online in the last 3 to 4 years. I absolutely agree with you that would all be included and incorporated. 100% agree with you on that.
So, Carolyn, you've been dying to
Yes,
say
I'm on the task force, obviously, and I'm on EDC, and I'm the liaison to this group. This is the first I saw of this, so when you said this was task force supported, I wasn't at the last task force meeting,
Right.
but this is the first time I'm seeing this, so I can't say that I had input on this.
No, clearly we did not have a full
so this was not something, and I just got this yesterday, so I'm digesting it. Obviously, I want to also bring up, Jeff had success over the years working with Main Street. The whole idea of the task force is to bring professionals together, marketing professionals, including myself, to work with Jeff and all that for free, to come up with this and not be a burden of cost. And so I don't know if there's a conflict of interest because Jeff's the chair of the task force and he's the one who, we're saying, I would never come and want to do work knowing that there may be a conflict of interest. So when we talked about the website, I was going to do it for free, a consultation and do designs like that, no cost. Now we're getting an invoice, you know? So I don't know how this became how it is. And I just want to say, I think the task force could do a lot of this. And that was the point, that we were going to define the tagline, define the messaging. And yeah, so the tools of print and photography, those could be materialistic things that could be a line item. But as far as the think tank and the creativity, I thought we were trying to do that with the task force.
Well, there has, and that's why I said transparency on this. So it was a request that I made of Main Street, and so it was not coming in the other direction. And as I said in the discussion, Jeff did recuse himself to do it. We're contracting with Main Street. Main Street has contracted with Jeff, so we've been very, upfront about that. As far as what the task force can do, that group was brought together with that skill set, as you talked about, but the marketing group still has the website work to do. We're talking about video. We're talking about looking at goals of the Economic Development Commission, so there's a lot of work to do in that regard. And so it was not to burden any one person with doing, this is a huge task to do. So while the marketing group is working on all of those things, and we've contracted with the virtual town hall to get the website done, we're not looking for anybody to do that pro bono, and we're going to contract out, hopefully, with Main Street and have them do this work while the task force is working on a whole lot of other things.
The other thing I'll mention is, I think originally what they were talking about is a positioning statement for economic development. What happened is they started to move into the branding, and to be very clear, I mean, even though you guys, we helped, we're the ones who financed the $100,000 to do the brand. It is something more than anyone can do pro bono to redo, because you can't, as a marketing professional, you can't just slap in another word and everything else stays the same text-wise. It has to be reintegrated, and when you put your positioning statement changes, your competitive advantage changes, all of your ancillary materials change, and that's something that we would not want anyone to do pro bono. I mean, we've invested a ton of money. I can't have anyone volunteering, whether it be Jeff, whether it be a different RFP, touching the brand on a just a half part-time basis.
So is this a
that-
Main Street invoice? Is this a town?
Well, it's not an invoice.
Well, I mean, but it's a proposal
Yes,
for, so is this
Again,
a
if
Main
someone
Street or is
wants
it a
to-
town? Is it our,
I also want to mention that in our discussion with the first selectman, it was very clear that the task force makes recommendations. So the work and the execution has to be done through town staff, and Main Street would be an extension of town staff in the same way that we're working with the IT department to do the website. So it's very clear that the task force cannot actually do the work, and the first selectman was very specific about that. So I think that protects us through the process to contract through Main Street to do that work. We will review it, we will make our recommendations on it, just as we're doing with the website, and again, while we're doing all the other things we have to do.
Part of mine, I understand Carolyn's point, and to her point, there's been no discussion of, this could be a great price, I don't know, but this is the first I'm seeing, I don't know any other requests for proposals or bids or anything like that, which the town ad nauseum does every single time, so I'm not sure why in this case they're not going to do it. But putting that aside, I'm not sure why, my point is, why are we contracting with Main Street? Why is the board of Main Street doing this as opposed to Economic Development Commission, task force, doing this and staying in?
Again, you can say the same thing as I did through the website. We had a full discussion on, will we go out for an RFP on that? And we said, no, we have a current vendor that we use, so we're going to go back to that vendor. This analogy of the situation is the same. Main Street did this brand, they own that brand, and so we're going back to the vendor to refresh that brand. So it's not.
And it's still in partnership.
Yeah, but the vendor.
Nothing has changed. It's the same way we did it last time, where Main Street led and received, I wrote the grants, we have 3 grants plus private money to do this $100,000 project. We worked with town staff very closely to get all this done. It would be the same exact way, but we are still the subcontractor.
That was my original point. I agree with all the effort. I think it was very nice. I don't think it hit the mark on the economic development side of marketing. And I have a concern about that. And I don't think it should be, I don't know why we're contracting with Main Street. That's not your main area of work and body of work. I don't think that's what the Main Street Board's all about. With Mr. Dornenberg, how that works out, whether it should be a request for proposal, whether that's a great one, I understand and appreciate Carolyn's points. But I'm more concerned with that the town have the proper message, and that come from, there's a pretty big commission here, and I think the commission should be involved in working face-to-face with the person, whoever that's going to be,
You would
the
be, just
company.
as you will be with the website and everything else.
Then we don't have to contract with Simsbury Main Street. We can go right to the individual.
And who would manage that? So, I mean, I think the same way that Main Street
We've got a
managed
commission
the-
here. I mean,
But we're not capable of doing, let me,
well, managing, I don't know why we aren't, and we have a task force. I don't understand
but
why.
the task force, when the task force was created, one of the charges, what started it was we wanted an EDC website. I personally don't want the marketing subcommittee of the task force to lose focus on, we've got a website that is gonna be rolling out. We want them to spend the time making sure the EDC component of the new town website is spot on.
Well, I agree with that.
Okay, and with a finite amount of time and talent to do that, how many projects can they take on and manage when this, they're in tandem, because this has to happen at the same time that the website is happening, because you can't launch the website if you haven't refreshed the brand, because then you've got two different messages
The
and.
task force is only a recommendation body. I think we've got to be very careful on that. That's especially with the first selectman when it comes to process and doing things and procedures and what happens. They make recommendations.
Right, and I think we as a commission, if we have input into what the message is, then we need to have a special meeting or something where we each bring 3 to 5 points of what we want to see incorporated into the message to the people who are doing it. To make sure our voices are being heard.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
That's exactly
But
part of the
then-
process, and that's exactly what took place last time.
That's what,
It's not
I'm just saying, why does it go through the Main Street Board? I agree exactly with what you said. There's a group out there, whoever it may be, that's hired to do this, and they come to us. I don't understand
And
why
that's
we're
Main
getting
Street.
Well, yeah, but
no, it's Dornenberg at this point.
No, we own the brand.
hold on.
Dornenberg, we hired him.
is your
Who
objection?
owns the brand now? You?
What brand?
It's us through it's
Who's
us.
us?
Main Street.
But what
Main Street
brand?
owns the
The
brand, right?
Simsbury brand that was created 8 years ago.
What's the brand? What is the brand? What do you
All
want?
of the materials, the logo, the
Heritage
tagline,
Charm
all of
Adventure right now.
all of
Hey, I
the-
never even heard of the
I don't need that
brand.
brand. That's my point. That's what they started with. I don't
Right,
need
but
that
is your
brand.
objection-
I need a new brand.
We'll give
Well, that's
you
what they're
one.
talking
What do I-
about.
But then who's gonna own it? Main Street?
Chuck would like to say.
It
I'm
is.
just trying to, is your objection that you don't like the brand itself, or you don't like the process of how it's done? Because,
Well,
we were involved, this commission was involved last time
Years ago.
it was put together, right?
Absolutely.
I'm just saying,
It
like,
was slightly, it was Main Street embarked upon a very, all kudos to them for doing it, but it was, they were branding the town in a particular way. We helped out and assisted. We got in kind of on the end of that, and they came to us to help assist, but it was their deal. And as she says, they own the brand, they do. That's right, it
But it
wasn't
wasn't
us.
done- it
What
wasn't
I'm saying,
done-
I'm doing it differently and saying, well, now, for economic development, the town should own the brand. The town should say, this is what we want. It should be the town's. What we're getting here is, we're gonna spend this kind of money, and it's gonna be owned by Main Street. The brand will be owned by Main Street, not the town, when it's all said and done.
well, but it wasn't done, it wasn't done, Main Street did it at the exclusion and unawareness of the town. It was an integrated thing, right?
Well, to
Everybody
some
was
degree,
involved in
to
it.
some degree, but not to the degree that I think it needs to be this time, to make sure we get the right
But the
message this
conversation,
time.
Lou, quite frankly,
who
over the
wasn't
past few years has definitely
involved?
changed. There are more parties at the table, and there has already been, with the establishment of the task force, a lot of that discussion. It's not all of a sudden going to go away because we're returning to a resource that originally did this. And when they did do it, it has worked quite successfully that the
Yeah.
town has used it. There hasn't been
Yeah.
any issue with although Main Street owns the brand, the town
I didn't even know they owned
usually
it till just
happy
now.
with.
Well, who cares who owns the town? I mean, it's a town, it's a town's brand, but
In the interest of time, and going back to what Chris said, we started a process over a year and a half ago trying to get our website up to speed so it actually looked like others, because if you're going to do something economic in the town, the first place you're going to go to if you're an out-of-towner is to the website. You're not going to go looking for brochures.
Well, but the branding is part of it.
Well, fine, but you're going to go to the website. If you're interested, you want to find
Stated by
out
Osprey.
what can I do in town, what are the regs, who do I talk?
Yeah.
So what we want to do, going back to this, is what we can do to get our website up. So can you address that particular issue as where we stand on that now?
Well, I don't want to leave this conversation because the two of them go together.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say to you,
But
and it's to Chris's
in the
point.
interest
So we're not going to get a
time,
website until the branding's done?
We're going to be working on the content of it, as well as having the working sessions that Sarah's talking about for the brand, but we also have to do that with the website, too. There's a lot to do.
So-
And that's the point of trying to involve as many people
Yeah.
with as many skill sets as possible to do this. So, we've gone through sort of the steps of this as best we can. There is a lot of timing that is pretty critical to this as well. And so, although I will say, and I was extremely disappointed, we did not have a quorum at the last task force meeting because members did say they were going to be in attendance and were not. I think, would be having a different discussion right now. I believe that when we go back to the task force, based on the conversation we had, which included everything from, this is a very good deal, from people who have professional sort of input to this because what they do on a daily basis, to knowing that we need to keep things moving forward together, that the task force, what I would hope was that the EDC would recommend that they would approve this to go forward to the Board of Selectmen with the approval of the task force at its next meeting. If the task force doesn't approve it, that's a different situation. But what we have here is a good established relationship with Main Street where we can contract with them. And as I said, they're not putting this in their work plans or didn't. They're going to manage this project, for free.
Yeah.
So they're going to do this while the task force is doing all the other work they're doing. And again, the hopes is at the end, we have a website, we've got marketing materials, we've got a package of things together. So that.
When the rubber, who is whether it's Heritage Charm Adventure, Heritage Charm Opportunity, or some other word, whatever it is, or whether it's blue versus yellow, where does that actually get, when does that get, solidified? In what kind of body, or is it just sort of group consensus and?
Well, what'll happen is, and what we can include in this, Lou, because I agree, the Economic Development Commission needs to be a big voice. Maybe we could have one separate work session just with this body, but with all due respect, there's tons of other people that need to be included when you're talking about economic development. You're talking about business owners, you're talking about realtors, you're talking about lodging, so it's not just this commission. I mean, we brought in, and 8 years ago, we brought in every single stakeholder. We had every group right down to beautification, as well as the major business owners, as well as the banks. So, if you would like, we could have a separate work session just with this commission, but it doesn't get lost on that there needs to be other input into the whole big economic development scheme and all of the material that goes out, which is not just this commission.
Which I think brings to a point that everyone's sick of me making, and I make it every month, and I'm going to make it again, and I'll
Dave,
probably
you
make.
do the big Y.
Yeah, I was going to say the big Y. Yeah, I'll probably make it next month too. This is why we need a person outside of the first selectman, because I don't think.
Yeah,
the
we
first
know that
selectman's-
story. Let's go
No,
on.
no. We're
you
gonna.
get to ask your question.
Yeah,
We did the big
we're
Y,
running
so
out
we're
of
gonna do
time.
this. Okay, we need a person whose job it is to head economic development. We need to pay a person, because what we want to do is we want to increase the economic base of this town. And we have a lot of people working hard, and they're doing good work, but they're commissions. There people are volunteering. If we want to bring business in, whether it's from Europe or Asia or the Pacific Northwest or from outside of Boston, if we want to grow our economic base, if we want a commitment to that, if we want to increase our base to decrease property taxes and make Simsbury a destination, we need to do it professionally. That means that doesn't mean an economic development coordinator that we had in the past that sends mailers out. What this means is a business development executive. They don't need to work in government ever. They need a business development executive that has a Rolodex, that can make calls, that's used to managing large, diverse teams in a complex matrix. That's what we need, because if we're having all of this disagreement and confusion regarding simply the creation of materials that we're going to use to market the town, how are we going to effectively go out in the marketplace and compete with all of the other regions that we need to compete with? We shouldn't be arguing about $15,000 expenditures and who should be doing those types of things. What we should be focusing on is we need to get we want to compete. We want to get gigabyte speed here. Where's the proposal for that? I've asked the first selectman's office that several times. Why aren't we going after that? That's what we need to be doing. We need to be doing the big stuff. We need to be doing the big stuff. And if it's happening, I don't see it. I've been asking the questions. I haven't heard anything back. But that's what we need to be doing. And we need a person, bless you, we need a benevolent dictator of sorts to be heading this up and herding the cats and articulating the vision and going out and promoting Simsbury, the brand, and all of the resources that we have to offer companies who want to locate here.
Jay?
Thank you.
We've heard this a lot of times, and you must have someone in mind for this.
I don't.
I mean, Bill Clinton, I mean, maybe Lieberman, I mean, you obviously have someone in mind.
No, I have. If you put a gun to my head right now and said, "Tell me somebody,"
Well,
I couldn't.
do that.
Hey, gentleman in the back could.
Seriously, we've heard this and heard
No,
this.
I have-
and heard it.
I-
And you must have someone in mind.
I have no one
Don't
in
be
mind.
bashful.
Look at me. Am I bashful? If I had somebody in mind, I'd tell you. I don't have anybody in
Mr.
mind.
Okay,
Come
in
on.
the interest of
We're
time,
eating
do we have any
You
comment on the
really must have
website and the
somebody-
I do not have
status?
anyone in mind.
I'm
Anything to
shocked.
say?
I'm
Because I'd
shocked.
like to move on to Jeff if we don't.
Well, we,
I
Yes?
had asked, and so I would ask, would you consider forwarding this to the Board of Selectmen with the approval by the task force at its next meeting?
So I just
before
had
that
one
vote,
question.
I have
so-
one question.
And I don't think I got an answer. So where does it sort of get solidified what it's going to be? You know, after everybody has their,
Actually, public hearings. After we would host brainstorming sessions. The proposal, I think, includes up to 4, and then the creative team, which is the Dornenberg Callenbeck Advertising, would go back and would provide a proposal. Would
is it the
provide
Board of
a-
Selectmen that finally votes, or there's no vote?
Well, here's the
like that?
thing, that I don't know, I'd have to clarify that, but I do know the process is, at the end of the day, and I've double-checked this with the first selectman, whether or not they make a recommendation, it has to go before the Board of Selectmen, and then if the Board of Selectmen votes to approve, Lisa would be the ones to work with Main Street to oversee, you know, the process portion.
okay, but if
Oh, no,
we're-
I
if-
just meant-
If we have a vote to approve the, you know, to have the the task force approve the funds to go forward with this.
Well, you're voting
Wouldn't it
to-
come back to the EDC because the funds are under the task force, which is under us
You're
to
talking about the contract or the work?
I don't know.
the work?
Well,
I mean, if we're contracting for the work, wouldn't we be able to see it before it went to the selectmen?
oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yes, but I just want to be clear on the process, though. Lisa was very clear that it has to follow the same process that the website followed when it
Which-
comes
Which
to
came
the
back here before it went there.
exactly. And in the same way that you guys are going to see the templates of the website,
Yes.
you will be involved in this process throughout it, not only within the workshop aspects of it, but through the, you know, final comments of it. But ultimately, and again, this is why I stress this, it was stressed to me by the first selectman, virtual town hall contract, that work, we make recommendations, it's ultimately up to her and staff to finalize those things. Same thing with this. So I really just.
That's what I was
but
asking. I didn't know where that
not, of course,
happens.
without the input of this.
It has to go
board.
back through the
So
process that's
it takes
already
place in
been
her office with the town
established.
staff. That's where they say, I
Yes.
like
Yeah.
red versus yellow, or what.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is photography part of this?
No.
So that's an extra expense. Where would that come in?
Well, we
Well,
already
we-
talked about that, I should say, with the task force. So just a little quick summary of, we've got the $10,000 web contract. this 15.5, let's just say for argument's sake, we've got a total of $32,000. So we were still talking about potential need for some writing. I think, we talked a little bit about that last time. That will likely maybe sort of come through some of this. But the photography would be an addition, and we also
Well, a lot
discussed
of
the
the
video.
photography, like the town utilizes Main Street's photography. We get a lot of in-kind photography. We send people out to take specific photos. For example, we just got access to all of the beautiful photography at the grist mill and millwork, Landworks gave us all of that. So we don't anticipate that would be an extra cost, because a lot of times, like the town website utilizes our photography.
But we
our
do have
vendors.
funds within that $32,000 for that work, if it's needed. And that was some of the discussion that came up through the website, I know too.
Put the brand aside. Let's assume the brand we have now is perfect. When would the website be done?
Still wouldn't be,
We're looking to get it done in September.
Yeah,
that hasn't changed. Remember the
Finished
rollout.
by September?
we're looking
Or when
to,
will
If we
we-
can get this to move forward, yeah.
But putting the brand aside, let's say we have the perfect brand. The brand is the brand, whatever it is.
Yes.
It's perfect.
Yes.
When's the
website
website going to be up
timeline
and running? Because I
doesn't
think that was an
change
initial
last
question.
month.
Yeah.
And then I have a follow-up to that, but
yeah, no, I think the initial timeline that was outlined by Rick, and he asked us
To please avoid July being tax season, and we said we would be working on some template work back and forth, and then get into beta testing with the hope of this being
The beta
completed.
testing wouldn't happen until after tax season, because they didn't want to mess up the online payments.
That was changed on the timeline
Yeah.
for the
Me
website from the last meeting that was laid out.
And that's
Well,
why
does this, and this goes to, I think, part of Mark's question, does this whole proposal, because I heard that they have to go in tandem and we have to have the message before the website gets out there, does this delay that process of the website?
No.
Because we have to wait for the branding?
You're not waiting, it's parallel,
Yeah.
parallel paths, Lou, so it wouldn't hold up the process.
I think-
However,
I think not doing this-
However, not refreshing the brand and doing the website and then refreshing the brand after the fact
That holds
actually
it back.
causes more work and more money,
Yeah.
because you've got to go back and redo things.
The price will go up
So
on
if
on a
the
certain- on a
brand is
number of
refreshed
things
and
that
the
you-
colors become blue and gold, like the room,
Everything changes.
everything changes. So the template changes with virtual town, like all that changes again.
Okay, so we're shooting for a September 15th, okay. With that, moving along, any other questions for Nancy?
Just one completely unrelated, I don't have a good segue. The 400-person caller survey that's being done with respect to open space and the senior center, can I make a suggestion? My suggestion is this: there be a link on the website and perhaps a little promotion of the fact to a survey to let anyone who wants to participate in the in a survey participate. So you could just go to SurveyMonkey, do a survey, questions, a little bit of text. You can get thousands of people to participate. I understand there might be the value of doing the deep dive with the 400 because you could ask follow-up questions. I'm sure they have a whole methodology, and I'm not doubting the validity of that. But I think people would really appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on it. So maybe you could even have these same people design a web-based survey. It should be of minimal cost.
Yeah,
You
I-
could do it essentially free with SurveyMonkey.
and I guess Hiram, we could ask that of the folks that are doing the survey.
We'll tell them that that's a suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Board of Selectmen, I think, approved 25,000, so there was other monies that were there, and I don't, you had mentioned that they.
Yeah, I mean, you could, I mean,
It's always
and
nice
if
to
anyone
save
wants
money,
help
but-
on that, I've done it, so I'd be happy to
Yeah.
help do a survey that is, if you don't want to necessarily blast out to, you could send it out to people who are already, you already have their email addresses because they opted in to get news from the town. You could send it to them, you could put a link on the site, you don't have to worry about double counting because it goes by IP address, so you could fill out the survey 100 times, it'll only count once, and all that good stuff. So I think it would be a nice opportunity for people who care about what's going on, but the fact is just, gee, a lot of people are really super busy with work and families and they can't make these meetings, to give people an opportunity to voice their opinion and participate, I think it'll be whatever decides, whether it happens, it doesn't happen. People, I think, feel a little bit better about the result if they are afforded that opportunity to participate.
Okay, Nancy, on this particular Rise Simsbury brand, are you asking anything of us today?
Yes, I had asked before if you would, with approval by the task force at its next meeting, assuming that approval, that we would move forward to the Board of Selectmen, so that you would make that recommendation, that with the approval of the task force, that this scope of work would move forward for approval by the Board of Selectmen.
So you're asking for us to take a vote on this?
If you would, it would help us, as Toulouse Point, keep things moving forward, to get the work done and move forward with the website
Okay.
and the branding at the same time.
Would somebody like to make a motion?
Excuse me, before we make the motion, Carolyn has raised a specter to me, and I'm a little concerned about it. The head of the task force for this section is this guy that you had hired. Now, funds are going to flow ultimately from the town and to him, whether they go through us or around us, it doesn't matter. I think my vote would only be, I think there's a possible conflict there, so if a request for proposal would have to go out for, I would support that.
I've got a thought on this. I think it's important that we are vigilant when it comes to contracts being awarded, to make certain that there aren't conflicts. Looking at the numbers here, the numbers seem to be small numbers, both in absolute terms and relative to what these sorts of things typically cost. What I think, but there are other concerns that I heard was that, gee, what about the Economic Development Commission? What about, our input on this? So what about this as a potential proposal? There's a working session for members of the Economic Development Commission to provide input into key areas, and with that be part of, I'm not a
Yeah, and I had offered that, absolutely.
motion person. So, so basically, like, hey, here's the thing. We formally incorporate this commission into the working progress, into the process by having a working meeting one evening. If you can't make it, here's your opportunity to provide some feedback. Here's the things that we're talking about. You could send it off via email too, that gets incorporated into it. Would that?
Do it in tandem with the task force?
I was going to say, within the review and recommendations
It's up to you.
of the task force of this work, Chris has been at all of our meetings. I mean, we could more formalize it to say, and I invite you guys to all of our meetings
We'd
as
hold
well.
a joint meeting,
But
working
joint-
session between the task force and the EDC.
Correct.
Would that make
Yeah.
more sense? Because
Yeah.
then we killed
Sure.
two important, you get the input.
Sure, but would that address some of the
Yes.
concerns that I heard earlier with respect to?
And, again, we have been transparent about the relationship of Jeff to the task force, to the town, to
Yes.
Main Street. That is out there and again been shared with the first selectman and all of the members that were present at the last task force meeting.
And he recused.
And he recused himself.
Yes, he did. He left the room.
This is out there in terms of the contract being approved by the board of selectmen and executed by the town. So if there's an issue, it's not going to be going forward. But so far, again, from the task force discussion to date and discussions with the first selectman to date, we've been encouraged to move forward.
I think if
So-
there had been one more person at the task force, you would have had a unanimous vote to present this to us.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was public audience at that meeting, and it was unanimous that everybody in that room at the time agreed that this was not only a good price, but the right direction to go in. and you would have had an approval from the task force.
I feel confident about that, but again, that's why I point out what took place, and it was extremely unfortunate that we did not have the attendance we expected, but I would have likely been before you this morning with that approval having come. And
Since
that's why I'm
some people
asking.
have expressed a little surprise that this came up today, or we got it yesterday in an email, I'd like to take this and move it to our next meeting so people have time to digest this and talk among themselves, and that we take it up at that time.
I would
how's a month
probably
gonna-
request you have a special meeting then if you're gonna do that, because with the timing
There's a
of the
timing
task
issue.
force, we will not be able to keep this thing moving forward because you've got meetings that are just, so that goes to what the process.
Do the
was
commissioners
talked
want to
about.
have a special meeting strictly to discuss this issue? Is there any
do it now.
interest in that?
Just do it now.
Can we do an up and down vote first on whether we're going to approve it, and then if we don't do that? I mean,
You gotta
Hands
make a
down.
motion.
So moved.
Some
Moves what?
To vote on Nancy's proposal,
So you have to make a motion.
What's your motion, to approve it, or?
to approve it.
to approve it in conjunction with the meeting, joint meeting.
Working session between the task force and the city.
So?
I'll
you have a
Second it.
I'll second.
Okay.
Discussion?
All in favor?
Oh, no.
Discussion?
There's always discussion.
As proposed, I am not going to vote in favor of it. I think there's way too many moving parts. It's $15,000. It's came up yesterday, and we're being forced into it, and we're being forced to have a special meeting on something. As proposed, I have a number of complaints that I've already voiced with it and concerns. I'm not saying it ultimately can't work, but I think there's a lot more that has to be fettered out. I think there is Carolyn's point is something that has to be discussed and figured out. And so my vote's going to be no on this proposal at this point in time.
Anybody else have something to add?
I guess the only thing I would add is I appreciate Lou's concerns, and that's the
Yeah,
reason why.
you don't have to debate his concerns.
No,
so
I'm.
Let's just continue, could we?
I'll be
Just
brief.
We have to get it out, because we have somebody else.
Yeah.
Just make your point.
I want
Okay.
to say, I'm going to abstain. And I'm not much on abstaining, but I'm going to abstain on this one because I think all that has to be sorted out, so.
Okay.
That
Anybody
will
else?
neutralize my vote, but I abstain.
I'm just going to
because
make a comment. If you want more information on what has been going on in the task force, you need to go. You need to attend. We're getting updates from Nancy on a monthly basis, but the amount of information that I get sitting in public audience, listening to the different working groups, is amazing. And you hear the back and forth and the support for all of these things. And, we have opportunities to be part of the process. And,
Can I come in on that? Because I've been at every meeting except for the last month, and this is the first thing I saw. So the only meeting I missed was this one that brought all these figures and ideas to the table. So I think I missed a big one, and it wasn't by choice. I've been at every one. And so I feel like, there is a conflict of interest. Jeff is highly capable of doing this job, and I wouldn't want to say if my vote's a no. My vote would be a yes, because I believe in the process, and I believe Jeff could do a great job. But it's the money part, and I think the marketing group put a lot of effort into already a tagline and messaging, and with EDC feedback and community feedback. So I would hate to stall the process. So my vote would actually be a yes, because I want to see something done, but I'm disappointed, that.
It's my apologies to that. And certainly, to Chris's point, we've been sharing all along. And I think what happened was, it was one of those things where, okay, we got the website approved, geez, we're going to do this rebranding. Wait a minute, to Chris's point, if we move forward in one direction on one thing and we don't have all the components together, we're going to have to backstep to that. And so this opportunity, again, it's a resource that we've used before. And, the comments have been positive by the task force. The comments have been positive by the first selectman. And so I really just sort of hoped that information today would make all of you feel comfortable that to this point, the task force has done outstanding work. And we've got a lot of really great people. And again, although, disappointed that the group, and I know Carolyn wasn't feeling well, as no comment negatively towards her attendance, because she has been there at every meeting. But we do have the opportunity to do a lot of good work.
and have it managed and use the money that we were designated to do towards marketing in a really good way for the town. So I would.
Okay, so we have a vote here to approve that we recommend to the task force that this be taken to the first selectman. Is that correct?
Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those against? All those who abstain? Okay.
Thank you very much for not only letting me go before, but
Okay.
apologies for.
What was the
So I
vote?
guess it passed. I didn't count.
What was the vote?
How many voted for it?
For it?
4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
How many voted against it?
2 against?
2 against and 1 abstention.
Abstention.
2 and 1.
It carries.
Thank you.
Okay. With,
I gotta go.
okay, with that, I'd like to have Jeff Shea, who's taken time out of his busy schedule, to give a quick update on the most recent draft on what's going on at Simsbury Meadows. This was done about 10 days ago, and sort of like, this is the second time that Fuss and O'Neill has presented to us.
I'm really sorry I had to leave. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hopefully this will be brief.
I'm sorry we
you
didn't get to
kidding?
you sooner, but
That's quite all right. I was actually a little blurry-eyed from the Board of Finance public hearing.
Thank you.
This one's for some real dough.
Good morning. I was asked to give a brief update of the status of the Simsbury Meadows Master Plan project. Little background. Essentially, the project, the task of the project was to update the master plan that was completed back in 2008. Since that time, there was a sense that the needs for the future development of the area, and actually the development that had occurred there was not reflected in the plan, so that needed to be kind of updated to kind of understand where the future was going to be for the Meadows. Also included in the update was updating regulatory, restrictions on the property. There had been changes to the floodplain, changes in 2008 that increased or actually restricted potential use of the property even more because the floodplain elevation actually increased. There was also an update to the soils, wetland soils that were available via DEP. So the First Selectman's Office created a stakeholders group, feeling that that needed to be a sort of a size that could be manageable. And that stakeholders group included the Parks and Rec Commission, the Open Space Commission, and the Economic Development Commission. So all those parties provided representation at 2 stakeholders meetings, one that occurred in November and one that recently occurred in March. And there was a sort of brainstorming process in terms of what could be, or wants and needs, I guess, in terms of facilities that may be developed in on that property. Things like recreational fields that were a priority back in 2008 sort of dropped off the table in that recreational fields had been developed around town, and there seemed to be sufficient number right now to serve that population. So that was sort of recommended to be taken out of the plan. We looked at developable areas in the Simsbury Meadows, including the Performing Arts Center sort of area, which is really the quote-unquote high ground on the property, has the least restrictions relative to future development. And also looked at the more widespread wetlands, floodway, sort of riverine areas along the Farmington River, and what could be done there. So just quickly going through this presentation, this was the presentation that was provided at the most recent meeting. It showed some current improvements on the property in the area, primarily of the Performing Arts Center. It showed the updated wetlands and floodway designations. And if you look at that slide, you can see the green area being the area within the floodway. That's on the third slide. That area has somewhat severe restrictions in terms of what you can do there. Things like flood conveyance and storage are critical in any regulatory process, so that somewhat limits what can be done in those areas. And the orange line, if you can see that line on the plan, reflects the 100-year flood elevation, which, again, provides another restriction on what can be done. Finished floor, habitable spaces have to be above that flood elevation. So the space within the orange line is very restrictive, as you can see. And this isn't based on accurate data, but it's based on record data that can be refined through a detailed survey. So, and again, the soils information on the next sheet shows federal wetlands, which are the blue areas, which are more restrictive than the pink areas, which are alluvial soils and have less regulatory oversight at some level. So the consultant, Fuss and O'Neill, came up with some recommendations based on feedback from the stakeholders on what might happen in the meadows. Trails was something that was in the original plan and still seemed to have some traction for this plan. There is tremendous habitat in that particular parcel that we're finding out through this process. There's been a lot of study done there. We haven't actually digested all of that at this point. It's beyond the scope of the project, frankly. But to provide better and more convenient public access to that area seemed to be something that was desirable. Parking, again, access and connectivity to that trail system right now is fragmented. Frankly, you can get lost down in the meadows. I've been down there. It's very, very wild, so to speak, even though at one time it was developed as nurseries and such types of use, farming. The development of a trail system would require, permitting, crossings through wetland areas, structures of at some level. So there are challenges to get a loop, which we feel is critical to kind of opening the area up to the public. Parking is also an issue, access. So we looked primarily in more detail at two areas, the PAC Center site, and you can see the slide that shows potential building areas, possible relocation of some facilities, and also reflects development that has occurred there, such as Rotary Park, the Boundless Playground, and the dog park, which hadn't been there for the 2008 study. The next slide, the South Meadow improvements, which is really the area behind the treatment plant, which seemed to present an opportunity for public access. There is access now via past the boathouse and in an informal sort of trail. The thought was to formalize that and make parking and more accessible and more convenient to the trail system, which is represented by the green and the red lines. There's also a concept to develop a meadows area. The yellow area on that slide represents upland soils that are more favorable to loading, parking, structures, that type of thing. So there was a thought that maybe that could be developed potentially as a fairgrounds area, or potentially down the road as a overflow parking area, or primary parking area when the Iron Horse development sites are potentially not available. So recently, we met with the Open Space Committee individually and received some correspondence from the Conservation Commission, which I provided to you. That was only received Monday night. There is some concerns, particularly with the South Meadow development in terms of encroaching into the habitat areas. And also some reservations for developing a formal trail system, which wasn't fully vetted, but there will be some additional discussion from Conservation on that. At the open space meeting last week, there was also concerns raised. in that, additional public access to that area might have some impact on migration of birds, species that may be down there that are, rare and endangered. And again, we don't have all that information sort of to digest, since we're looking at this at a much higher level as part of this study. So the next steps, certainly we need to work, and hopefully Hiram can help us with open space and conservation to kind of maybe ratchet some of these things down at some level to get some concurrence with them, maybe moving forward with some of these projects. We also have not really technically prioritized the projects that have been identified. There is a small amount of money. We could move forward with something. I think the intent was to develop a trail system. And that was kind of the first thoughts when this project was initiated last year. We also need to meet with the regulatory agencies to see what is actually possible, since we haven't done that, since we want to kind of vet what the potential projects would be down there before we meet with them. So we're presently trying to finalize a draft report, which will essentially be an addendum to the 2008 report, but we really feel like we need to go through a little bit of process here before we can actually move forward with any projects.
When you're looking,
Just one other thing.
okay, sorry.
The thought, and I don't know if this is the right approach, was to have a joint meeting with Parks and Recreation and Open Space, and I think at this point probably to include Conservation Commission also, because it's difficult to work with the individual groups and try to get
It's a good idea.
consensus.
I would think that's a good idea as well.
So we're trying to move this thing, again, forward as quickly as we can. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to slow down to kind of digest what feedback we're getting and kind of come up with a game plan to move ahead.
Just a question and a comment. This doesn't include the Old Bridge property in the plan yet, correct?
It didn't, and it technically was not in the 2008 plan, obviously, but we had brought it into this plan.
Okay.
Although it's not really addressed in this presentation well. One thing we did do this week is meet with Connecticut Audubon Society. There's an interest there in potentially partnering with the town in some fashion, and there's discussions that are ongoing. One Old Bridge property was something they were originally interested in and weren't aware of this project, but we're kind of trying to pull them into this also and see where it goes. Programmatically, they seem to have a lot of great ideas on, things they've done in other centers. I think they had 4 centers in Connecticut and 2 museums. So, that's a possibility.
Could you address Chris Ferraro recommended that, looking at there's various trails here which are in different colors, but they said in order to actually map the trails, he recommended that you would go out with a GPS backpack, so to speak, and walk the trails, and then that essentially gets put on a map. So you're looking exactly at where you walked and where that falls on the map. So then that against the floodway and the wetlands, you would know exactly where you might be crossing into or not. And that with that, then you would have at least the information as to would the trails go into those areas or not, or would it be seasonal, or would it be areas where it causes a real challenge as to how do you create the loop. But without that information, we do not have the data with which to make a better decision. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I agree.
We're sort of winging it right now, just looking at it on the map.
No, I agree, and I think ultimately that will have to be done, but I think to get concurrence with these commissions, I don't think we need that information, frankly, at this time. I think there's enough information available, and again, it's a higher level concern, I think. It's not necessarily the proximity to what we're proposing, in my understanding. It's just the general concept, but I agree that's something we could do. I mean, that's a process that could be done fairly quickly.
Because I see this as 3 areas. I see, number 1, the least impact would be to explore whether you could build or maintain a trail system. The second one would be what happens in the South Meadows, if at all. And the third is what happens in the area where you can actually do some development. And I see those as three distinct areas and different levels of involvement and money. And I think if we look at them all at once and try to make a decision, we won't go anywhere. So I would look at the least impactful, which would be a trail system, as one component that we could move on, and the others to be dealt with as the commissions come together and decide where they want to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, I don't think that's a decision I can make, but I think that's kind of where we were thinking from day one on this project, and that's where we're trying to get to, but.
Well, my comment that I want to make with regard to the trail system, I would encourage, and you may have already thought of this, but the town of Simsbury produces an inordinate amount of Eagle Scouts, my son being one of them, who did a 2-mile trail connection up on the Metacomic Trail for his Eagle project. It would save the town a ton of time and money if you could identify portions of the project, if it's the GIS mapping, if it's trailblazing, things like that, that these scout troops could use as Eagle projects. These kids have produced some amazing projects through town. This is a great opportunity for them to do what they love, and to help the town quite a bit. If you could come up, when you're planning this, if you come up with a list of portions of the project that are Eagle candidate-worthy projects with the Scoutmasters, I think you would be very surprised at how quickly those projects get snatched up by the boys.
I agree. And, again, it's really about regulatory approvals.
Right.
Before anything can happen down there. Matter of fact, at the Ethel Walker property that we're kind of getting to the finish line on now in terms of a plan of development, we did identify such projects, and hopefully we'll get that participation. Certainly it can be done down here.
Yeah.
But we can't do anything without
Right.
regulatory approvals.
To the point of, now I don't know how much of this information I'm going to say is correct, but my understanding, or I heard, that a new architect was going to be proposed from the standpoint of a senior center to put a senior center building on that property down there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. My question, when I look at the question of whether the regulatory guys would permit that or not, it looks to me like under the 500-year floodplain, they couldn't do it. Would that be a correct assumption?
I can't say that's correct at this point in time. I don't think we have enough information to, and that's a process we're going through. We're actually, we're advancing the flagging of wetlands and the detailed topography of that area to kind of get a better understanding of the
Okay, but I'm
limitations there.
trying to get around to it because I'm probably the only guy in this room, or maybe even in the town, that remember when there was 3 feet of water down there back in the Great Flood of '55. Okay, so I kind of know the general area down there. And the question is, why would we be proceeding to hire an architect if we don't even know if we can put a building on that land?
The solicitation for the architect is going to allow us to opt out of the project. If
So
in
we
fact-
pay them nothing unless we go forward, is that it?
No, but it's going to be a phased approach in terms of when if we get to a point where there's a fatal flaw and we can't move forward, then we would terminate the contract with the architect.
Well, that doesn't really answer my question.
Yeah, because
How much money we talking about doing that? We're talking an $8 million project, basically.
100.
How much are we gonna
I can't
pay
tell
this
you right now
architect?
because we don't have proposals and we don't have scopes.
But
and
it's like the
fees.
chicken and the egg thing, right?
But,
You're not going to know whether you can build there unless you do additional.
Yeah,
additional
absolutely
investigation.
right. So that work has to be done, right?
And
So
even-
before that's brought to the public, that work either has to be done or you don't bring the proposal to the public.
That's correct.
Okay.
The
All right,
intent
I
is
rest my
to
case.
have a significantly approved project, have a project has regulatory approvals before it goes to referendum. That's the intent right now for the senior center.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm concerned about the expenditure of funds in advance of this whole thing, so,
Yeah.
okay,
Understood.
thank you.
okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming in, I really
Thank you.
appreciate
No
it.
problem. I'll leave these graphics if you guys are interested, the larger ones, and
Okay.
we could do it.
Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved. What?
I just had a couple of articles I wanted to give you.
Oh, okay.
So back on your motion to.
And the last thing I wanted to make sure that got on the record is that I just wanted to congratulate Carolyn for her.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Yes, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
On what?
I wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. Terrific award.
What was the
Yeah.
award for?
Women in Harvard Business Journal.
There's an article, Women in Business Award. I was one of the 8 recipients this year.
Congratulations. Is it the Women of Fire Award?
No, that's for real estate
Okay.
or finance. This is business, they call it Women in Business.
Congratulations.
The president of UConn is getting one. The EDC commissioner, Catherine Smith, is getting one. So I'm rubbing elbows with some good company.
Good job.
And then there's little Carolyn Bly from Simsbury.
Not so little. You're getting a big award.
May 14th is the luncheon. Love to have people from Simsbury.
Where's it gonna be?
At the convention center.
That's a nice Mother's Day gift.
Yeah, and the theme is on mentorship. So we all share stories about who our mentors were, and I picked my mom. She's been with me since day one. So the whole article talks about mentorship, and you know, they didn't put EDC that I was. They said I was involved in a lot of community, but they did mention some other things that I'm involved in. But so yeah, I'm excited about it. It was a real honor to be nominated. You know. Yes, oh yeah.
Okay, now, do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor?
Oh, I
Second?
thought we were already adjourned.
We almost got
Take
there.
that off the record.
It's okay.
There's no clerk here to take the notes.
Yes, it's online. I could share the link if anybody
That'd
wants.
be great.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hiram. That was very sweet. You never want to talk about any, it's like I'm my worst marketer. I don't talk about my business.